Greetings! It's another beautiful morning here in Hawaii. We have had several absolutely gorgeous days back to back. Spring is in the air. Spring is in the air. We are seeing flowers popping up everywhere. And so I have been very busy preparing my garden soil and planting. Spring comes early in Hawaii, so we're a little bit ahead of you guys in Duluth, Minnesota, as far as the planting's concerned. But preparatory work is coming up for everybody. I just had a question on the channel from one of the followers about soil prep for spring. I ordinarily hesitate to enter this area because not only is my environment here so incredibly different from what most of you experience, but the techniques that I have learned to use over the last half century are also not in the books much, okay? Somewhat, but not really. I started life as an organic gardener, and I followed most of the conventional organic practices during that period of time. I still utilize some organic principles. By and large, I have shifted to what I refer to as biological gardening rather than organic. To briefly explain the difference, organic gardening relies on hauling in natural sourced materials from some other location, moving them to your location to enrich your conditions. Now, my problem with that is that wherever you move the materials from has been depleted, and so I see organic as a pretty much a rob Peter to pay Paul type of an operation. It is far superior to the chemicalized agriculture that we developed during the 20th century because it considers biological aspects as part of its system. And that's the good part. The bad part is that whatever that stuff is you were hauling, it really belonged wherever you found it, not where you brought it to. And I have had terrible problems over the years, either myself or with clients where I've observed the problem, where people are importing or hauling in materials and they're bringing with the materials problems that they did not want, whether it's weeds, weed seeds, pathogens, nematodes, insects, coqui frogs. There's a whole lot of different things that can be moved around when you're hauling materials. Now, from my point of view, it doesn't make much sense, really, on the planetary level, because in nature, nobody goes out and fertilizes koa trees here on the island. I have never seen anybody running around with a bag of fertilizer feeding redwood trees when I lived in California. In fact, most of the nitrogen that's in a redwood tree in California is ocean-based. It comes from the salmon. The bears take the salmon, haul them up in the woods, eat them, and that's what's fertilizing a lot of the redwood trees and the Douglas fir on the west coast. They think Easter Island probably collapsed because in hard times they ate all the shorebirds. And the shorebirds were the only one thing that was bringing nitrogen in from the ocean and depositing it on the island so their plants and crops could grow. Once they killed off most of the shorebirds because they were hungry, ate the eggs, ate the birds, then the island went into a decline, and so did civilization. Again, nature's systems will actually support. Humans just don't really have the belief in this. We were so trained during the 20th century to believe only in technological and scientific approaches to things, and science is only now starting to begin to understand how important biology is in food and crop productions, in plant cycles, and so on. We're only getting there. We're way behind on it, really, is what the truth is. In my mind, I have kind of been the sort of guy that I sort of carve my own path and things anyway. I use my own judgment. I'll begin by following somebody else who seems to know a thing or two. I'll pick up what they got, but then I'll go from there. And the go from there for me is biological gardening. So basically, I don't haul much of anything in here. And so when it comes to soil prep for spring, my approach to how that's done is going to be radically different than most sources you'll find. That's the main reason I don't talk about it much. You guys out there will be doing just fine, following the information laid down by Rodale Press, the founding of the organic gardening publications. They have some great stuff, and what they have to say is good. And for most of us, with a patch of tomatoes in the backyard, their approach is going to work for you. I've kind of gotten a little bigger than the organic garden here. We're doing a lot of different crops over a couple of acres anyway. And so I'm looking a little bit more at farm-style techniques to begin with, and there are biological farm-style techniques that I have developed personally for this environment. So they don't necessarily apply for all of you. But to get started on that, the first thing that I do when it comes to preparing the garden soil for spring is I dump the trash. This here is a stainless steel bucket that I use in the kitchen for holding tea bags, coffee grounds, banana peels, eggshells, and whatnot. Basically anything that the earth will consume gets thrown into that bucket, and the bucket is dumped once or twice a day. I bring it out here into the garden, I dig a hole in the earth, I pile the material in the earth, and I cover it with soil again. I have a variety of reasons for why that is. I know I've had people out there, Bill, will you talk about composting? Well, I can talk about it because I am somewhat knowledgeable on how composting is done, and at a time, 25, 30 years in the past, I did a lot of composting, but it's a lot of work. And so my opinion is that if you're working too hard, you're probably doing it wrong. And compost is a lot of work. Whether you're using a tractor end loader and you're doing it by the dump truck loads, there's a lot of carbon footprint there, or whether you're using a spading fork and you're turning the stuff yourself, Anyway, more work than I want to get into. Plus, the other problem is to make good compost, you need a considerable volume of materials. So that means you're going to need like about at least 3 cubic foot of material at one given time to do a compost heap. It's going to have to be about 50% carbon bearing and about 50% nitrogen bearing by volume. Particle size, particularly on the carbon, will need to be about half an inch to 1 inch or so for good composting. And fractured, well, it means you got to grind the stuff to begin with. You have to have enough either, sloppy kitchen garbage or chicken manure or fish waste or something that's got a lot of nitrogen in it. And then you're going to need a lot of carbon, which basically amounts to wood chip most of the time. Now, there are other things that you can use, but wood chip is really, really common. Well, what's one of the good sources for wood chips? Hey, your local tree trimmers, right? And they'll probably dump a load of the stuff in your driveway and whatnot. But again, a lot of the trees that these guys saw are diseased. And I don't want to haul that stuff in here. That's basically what it boils down to. I don't need it. I got enough trouble as it is. So I use materials totally sourced right here within our environment. And in general, I create what I need. The prunings from the coffee plants, prunings from the fruit trees, trash from the bananas on the site, for instance, all used. Any garden trash, all weeds, okay? My kitchen garbage. My kitchen garbage is deemed fairly safe in the garden. And instead of trying to make these heaps, turning them, and then having to spread the heaps again and whatnot, I found that if I just simply put the materials in sight where I need them to be in the future. So that would be right in the planting rows, for instance, out in the garden. I dig a hole, I pop them in there, then the earthworms and the ants move in, they finish that stuff off. Since it's buried, we don't usually will get like rats or wild chickens or anything like this going after it. I don't get a fly problem when it's underneath the soil. So by putting it down beneath the earth, where mostly earthworms and other creatures like that live in the soil will work the stuff, it digests really well on its own without you and me having to flip a heap or anything on that order. I also agree with sheet composting, and that's particularly valuable when you're doing a stick mulch. That's where you'll take plants, slash them, pile the debris on the soil around your other crops, let them rot in sight. Nature takes care of all of this stuff without you having to break your back, okay? Now, for most of you, you're going to get going with the spring garden. You're going to run out and buy some bales of compost or get a dump truck load of compost or whatever. Very, very typical. Some of us are making our own compost, although generally speaking, unless you're really skilled at this, your home compost is usually not very good. It's typically too fine, too broken down, not enough structure to loft soil, and quite often is lacking nutrients too. So, if I import compost, I will usually import the stuff that's in bales and bags only from specific manufacturers that over the years I have grown to trust what they stick into a sack. A lot of the major brand names that exist on the market are junk. Yeah, they are. And the one thing you want to look out for when you flip a bag over, if it says peat, walk away. Okay, if it says municipal waste or municipal green waste or municipal compost, walk away, because those materials have a lot of problems associated to them. Peat, way too fine, holds too much water, tends to create root rot. I don't like it at all. The municipal waste oftentimes has, all the yard waste dumped in there. Well, the grass clippings are typically loaded with broadleaf weed killers. The broadleaf weed killers do not break down when you compost them. Your municipality may tell you, oh, the stuff's totally safe, we've composted it hot, and they're probably right. There aren't any insects maybe left alive in that pile, but the chemicals don't compost, and so whatever chemicals were in that junk when people hauled it, they become compressed, basically. The grass waste will reduce to maybe only a tenth of what its volume was, but the broadleaf weed killers that were in there remain in the same volume. So if you have, 1 gram of weed killer and 1 pound of grass clippings, when you've reduced it to a tenth of a pound of grass clippings, you still have 1 gram of weed killer in there. And I've seen some terrible problems with this. If you know your sourcing, most of the best materials that you can buy, they're going to be sourced probably from sawmill debris. When you have a good, clean wood material that sources, say, from fir sawing in the Pacific Northwest, or redwood sawing. Redwood compost was very popular in California for years, back when we cut a lot of redwood trees. Even pine tree compost and hardwood compost, very good, if you can get this stuff. On the West Coast, where I've lived for years, Kellogg Cascade makes some really good commercial products, and I'll stand behind what they throw in their bales most of the time. They do some good stuff. And if you're going to buy a commercial compost and bring it into the landscape, I would trust those products. You're not going to have problems with them. Spring comes, you want to prepare your soils. Good possibility, unless you are a really conscientious gardener, when you walk out there in spring, you got a big patch of mud and weeds. That's typical. Now, I have seen people who will do fall tillage. Not the best idea, really. I've seen people who will do spreading of compost and manures in the fall. Not a bad idea. Piling leaves from the fall trees in the garden, also a really good idea. Absolutely brilliant genius if you had planted a cover crop last fall. And I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're in Zone 1 USDA and you're up in Alaska or Canada someplace, or whether you're, in Zone 10 here or 11 in Hawaii. Cover crops are cover crops are cover crops. Now, we use different types of plants and seeds depending on where you live and what you're trying to do and what time of year it is. So this is a flexible situation. But if you're walking out there right now and the snow's melting away, let's say you're in Chicago, for instance, in the middle of the country there, and you look out over your vegetable patch and it's just covered with really nice green shoots of winter rye and hairy vetch. Applause! You have done it perfectly, because that means you planted a rye and vetch cover crop last fall. Probably anywhere from USDA Zone 1 to USDA Zone 6 in the middle of the nation. A wintertime cover crop of annual rye cereal, not the grass, cereal rye, and hairy vetch, which is a pea relative, a legume with purple flowers and furry leaves that fixes nitrogen. If you put those down last fall, say about October or so, broadcast them out there, got the seed covered, you've done just about everything you possibly can do. At this point, you'll probably want to start thinking about, when am I going to put the first crops in? And so we would let the cover crop grow and develop until we're ready to put in the first crop. About 2 weeks ahead of time is what it takes for preparation. And so now there's a variety of different ways a person can incorporate cover crops. Standard way is people dig them in with a tiller or a plow and a disc. That's very, very, very typical. Now here in Hawaii, I do not till. Okay, we have very soft volcanic ash soil here. We get a lot of rain in this environment, and so tillage is a no-no, because tillage just opens up the earth to destruction and erosion, being baked in the tropical sun and whatnot. So that's not a good idea here. Now, there are some environments, like when I lived in Wisconsin, the tillage was a reasonable idea. I'm not completely opposed to the idea of tilling soil, but it really depends on where you're living, how you're doing it, and what kind of soil you got and climate, as far as whether tillage is a smart or not so smart of an idea. Here, instead of tilling, the way I deal with cover crops is ordinarily I will mow them. That's the beginning. So I usually go over either with a machete or with a lawnmower, and I'll cut the crops down, lay them on the earth. When weeds begin to pop up, or if I had lots of weeds in the crop, for me, the next thing I'm going to do is I use a 400,000 BTU road flamer, the type they use for sealing road tar. In our environment here in Hawaii, that is an awesome tool if you know how to use it. I have done videos about it in the past, and again, it's another reason that I don't talk about soil prep much, because man, the people from California, they jumped on my back when I showed myself here in Hawaii with 150 inches of rainfall using a weed flamer, and they're all freaking out going, "Oh, Bill, you're going to set fires, how are you going to burn California? The fire's going to burn all the way across to Mexico, into the Sonoran Desert, straight up through Arizona, and burn into LA, right? That's kind of the way they act about it. This has so much to do with where do you live and what is the right way to do work where you live, So, I did use weed flamers in California. I use them very carefully, and I believe in the tool. It has a lot of advantages over many other tools, but it's certainly more appropriate for use in Puna than it is in San Diego. All right? So again, that's why I don't talk about this stuff much. My approach, I'm an extreme biological gardener. That's what I am, okay? I am not an organic gardener. I am not a conventional gardener. I am an extreme gardener in a tropical environment, in an environment where gardening is a whole lot more like exports, like hang gliding, man, like parasailing. It's a whole lot more like bungee jumping around here. We use flamethrowers, we use machetes, I'm serious. You won't get by in gardening here if you're too timid. It just doesn't happen. The jungle will eat you alive. Anyway, so if you walked out and you had a nice cover crop out there, you're off to the right start. A mature rye plant has a half mile of fine root hairs on every one of the plants. They tend to focus sort of a really beneficial fungi and bacterial biota around them. They produce a chemical that is a natural nematicide, so rye will drive nematodes out of soil. It isn't much good below zone 6. As you start to head to the warmer places down in the south, you're going to look at other types of crops for doing this. All right. For about half of the northern part of the country, I think rye and hairy vetch is the perfect winter cover crop. Again, it's sown in fall. It's grown to about 2 weeks ahead of putting in your tomato plants, for instance. At that point, I suggest mowing it first so that you don't get it all tangled up in your tiller, and then taking a shovel or a tiller and turning it under. Now, if you decide not to do it that way, you can simply mow it, throw some compost over the top of it, and then begin to plant directly into it. That works too. The rye and the vetch will die underneath the compost because it's buried. You can cover it up with a sheet of black poly and start planting through it. That works too. We use impervious mulches here, like weed block, quite a bit. You can flame it. And so if you're not terrified of a weed flamer, that's what I just did with my mustard cover crop I had here. In Hawaii, we don't use rye or vetch. The climate's just not suitable for it here. I use perennial peanut. That's a really good one. I use annual alfalfa. It works kinda. I use mustard, regular old broadleaf mustard, to repel nematode in the soil and add organic matter. Lately, I've been experimenting with mint. We'll see how that works. I'm not quite certain yet, but I believe that the mint oil does drive the nematodes out of my ground. Mint runs nicely. It makes a good cover crop under my coffee, for instance, and it smells good when I walk on it. I just got done flaming a patch of it over here, and I'll see what happens. Yeah, nothing like mint. I destroyed my mother's rock garden with that stuff when I was 10 years old. As far as cover crops are concerned, it's not just what you use, it's the time of year you're planting them and what you're trying to do with them. They are, in my book, the key to a successful garden. If you're purchasing products to use in your garden, the best ones are seeds. Generally, seeds are fairly clean. They don't come in with a lot of pests most of the time, or weeds. And so you're pretty safe to be using those without importing something you didn't want. Plants are what build soils, okay? And in most soils, what's absent is carbon. Nitrogen and a few other nutrients can also be absent, but carbon is the main one. Carbon is what makes soil black. That's why you guys living in the upper Midwest over there around, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin, certain regions, you have really, really deep black soils that were created by the prairies after the Ice Age retreated. Now, the parent material, the silt, sand, or clay that was left from the glaciation is the mineral basis for those soils, but everything else that really happened and made those soils agriculturally great was caused by plants. The association of prairie grasses and forbs falling and dying for years and years and years and years accumulated a lot of carbon. The kind of weather you have in the Midwest does not allow the carbon to break down that was deposited every year, so you get a bank account of it. other soils, like say in California with Mediterranean climates, the carbon breaks down real bad. Here in Hawaii, in tropical environments, man, the carbon's gone before it even hits the ground. And so addition of carbon here is really, really important. And so for me, that means cover crops, mostly, occasionally bag composts. And so there's my preparation. How about we take a walk around and just look at some of the things that Bill's been doing here this spring?
So, right here in front of us, just beyond my sweet onions, you'll see some rows of compost, and beyond it you'll see a big brown dead area. This region had been sweet corn. That's what was in it last fall. After the sweet corn was finished, I planted fava bean and perennial peanuts. The perennial peanuts creep across the ground, and the fava bean stands upright to about 2 feet. Just the other day I came through here and I chopped all the fava beans and all the perennial peanuts using a lawnmower, regular old 6-horse gas rotary lawnmower. I milled everything into fine particles. Then I came across the top with a 400,000 BTU weed flamer, and I cooked everything that was standing, that was alive. That got rid of most of the seed weeds. It probably won't remove all of the perennial weeds, but I don't have too many of them out here. But most of the lightweight seeding annual stuff dies in the process. My cover crops also die in the process. And then, because I don't till, I will typically go over the top, as you see these 3 dark strips here, with a bag commercial compost. This came from Kellogg Cascade, if you want to know. And now underneath that compost also, I have applied a good quantity of pelletized chicken manure. It's under the brand name of Nutri-Rich. It's made in Oregon. It's one of the cheapest organic fertilizers I can buy here in Hawaii. 50-pound sacks cost me about 13 bucks. It's dry and pelletized, easy to handle. It's in look like little chicken good and plenties. And I tossed it down the row underneath the compost. Put the compost over the top. The chicken manure will add the nutrients for the next crop, which will be broccoli in this area. The compost will bury whatever weeds might have been there, and will also allow me a surface that I can plant my plants into without having to really dig too deeply into the soil. I don't like to dig into the soil here, and the deeper I dig, the more weeds I expose anyway, because there's buried seeds. And here is what it looks like after it's actually been harvested. This was a row where I put marigolds and cabbages into the row, and it was done exactly the same way. Chicken manure laid down, compost laid over the chicken manure, and later marigold seeds scattered with cabbage transplants set in place. We're almost finished with this row. I've been harvesting it off. Here you'll see the same process was done with kale. There are a few weeds coming up underneath, but it's not bad. A couple places here where I had a little bit of problem with weeds. I took the bags from my soil and I put it beneath my kale over here to kill off the weeds. I recycle just about everything on this site, including plastic sacks. And right down there at the bottom of that banana, you'll see a big green clump, and that's peppermint. This entire area was covered in a peppermint cover crop. I buried a lot of it here with banana trash. And then over here you can see it's blackened because I cooked it all. Perennial peanut and mint were mixed over here, and they have literally been roasted. Now, one of the reasons that I like to use a flamer, not only I don't have to till to kill the plants off when I do that, and it will just toast all the little tiny seedling weeds for me without disturbing new seeds, but we have the semi-slug here and a problem with rat lungworm, and that flamer will exterminate 100% of any slugs that happen to be out here. So it's also a cleanup for my patch. And over here you can see we have laid out a sheet of weed block. I've been flipping things over. We had right over here I had weed block laid down, and right over that way I had cabbages. Cabbages got weedy. I harvested, they're gone, and so we put weed block over the top of the cabbages for now to kill off all the weeds that got started. Then I came over here where what we had originally had was a dead hayfield, and so it looks like this initially. Ferns and grass, ferns and grass, ferns and grass. I keep it back from my patch with a flamer. By toasting the edge, I come by periodically every few weeks and just keep that grass back where it belongs rather than letting it creep into my vegetable garden. As you can see right here, all the dead straw. Over the top of it, I applied some bag compost and chicken manure pellets, and then set Chinese cabbage transplants. Now the compost is required because we're planting on dead grass, and this is just sod that died, and it's really hard to get a cabbage transplant into that stuff, so it's a lot easier if I just dump a little compost and stick the cabbage into it, and then allow the roots to grow down into the grass below. This is how it eventually develops, because this corn was done exactly the same way. The field was killed by using the weed block. Once the field was dead, I went in, I put down compost, I put down chicken manure, and I planted sweet corn over the top of it. And the sweet corn is thriving. As y'all know, I absolutely love sweet corn because growing corn is a lot like growing a room. I mean, corn is a crop a guy can really get into. Here I am, inside my corn. It brings me back to childhood when we'd hide in cornfields. This is a vegetable that can really surround you. And so, for those of you who are going to ask me, Bill, what kind of fertilizer do you use? Here, Nutri-Rich, pelletized chicken manure. That's what I'm using. Right now, the bag is being used to cover a grass plant at the end of the cabbage row, so it won't grow. Like I said, I recycle everything. So right here, you will see where I have mowed my mustard cover crop. And there's some weeds and perennial peanuts coming up in there yet. Right over here is a bunch of weeds with perennial peanut. The little yellow flowers are perennial peanut. Here I have not done anything yet, but just beyond it, I had kale growing and perennial peanuts. I went through and I flamed. I mowed, then I flamed. Same process. I applied compost and chicken manure to the soil. Put in tomato plants. Stuck in some bamboo stakes over there. Now I have a few clumps of grass coming up I see in there. Those I'll deal with either by going back and reflaming or take a shovel and turn them over, one or the other, to get rid of the grass. But it's quite clean, as you can see the difference from what we had here to what we had there. And that's what a road flamer will do after the surface has been mowed. Again, any insects that are in there, a lot of the pathogens on plant leaves, and particularly slugs and slug eggs, all digested in the flaming. Oh boy, ain't that a beauty, huh? Now there's something that doesn't require much fertilizer. This is the Living Fence pineapple.
There you have it, folks. That's the way the Green Garden Guy deals with spring soil prep. Now chances are it is nothing like the way you do it. Now there's be some folks here on the island that may have picked up a thing or two there that they could use, but even here on the island, I mean, I get 16-foot deep soil. We do have a bit of this up on the Hamakua coast and a few other spots, but you know, most of the folks on the island even are living on lava, and so they're doing things differently. Again, some of it's transferable. Where you live, things are so different, you know. I've tried to kind of cover bases and be sort of open and generic on this, but questions as far as how do I deal with soil preparation in the garden or in the farm field, you're looking at it, it's not typical by any means whatsoever, and most of the systems were developed by me for my application here specifically, and this is what I recommend that the rest of you actually do. You know, I mean, like I say, if it's a small little patch, you're doing 6 tomatoes, oh, buy some bag compost, throw it down, dump some organic fertilizer there, put your tomatoes in, stick cages around them, watch out for bugs, and enjoy your tomato sauce. But if you're going to go beyond that, and in larger areas especially, you might want to look at some of the principles that I've put forward here and start to look at the possibility of using plants to grow your plants. It works, as you can see. The proof is in the pudding over here. It's a doable thing, and again, I import almost nothing. Aloha, happy gardening. Catch you on the next one.